Aloha Nui here from Hawaii Life Real Estate Brokers and Team Nakanishi. Today I'm going to give you the recap for one of our wind down Zoom meetings that we had like a few months ago. I'm really behind on the recaps and I'm trying to get caught up, and I really wanted to get this one out to you because it's on 1031 exchanges, which is a topic that we get a lot of questions on, and there's a lot of misconceptions about them. So before we get started, I need to give you the disclaimer that I'm not a 1031 accommodator and I'm not a tax professional. So if you have any real detailed questions about this topic, then you need to either contact your CPA or Julie Bratton at Old Republic Exchange. She was actually on the call with us I keep wanting to say a few weeks ago, but no, it was like couple months ago. Anyway, she was on the call with us and she gave us the rundown of the basics of the 1031 exchange. So I'm hoping I can give it back to you in a way that I don't put you to sleep, and that you can go and have a conversation with someone afterwards about it if you wanted to. I don't know, maybe you're not nerdy like me, but those are the kinds of awesome conversations I like to have at dinner. With silliness involved, of course. Anyway, okay, so what's a 1031 exchange? A 1031 exchange is a way to defer your capital gains taxes after the sale of an investment property. So basically what you do is you sell this property and you buy a new property, and you're not paying capital gains on this property at the time of the sale. Instead, you get to use any gains that you've made on this property and any tax money that might be due if you just sold it outright to purchase a new property. So it kind of allows you to buy more property. Now, it's just a deferment of taxes. Eventually, if you end up selling this new property, you will have to pay capital gains then. So it's just a deferment. It is not a way to get out of your taxes. A lot of people think it's a way to just completely avoid the capital gain taxes, and that is not true. That's one of the misconceptions. So no, that's not it. There are a couple ways that you can minimize your capital gains taxes, and one way is by moving into the property. So basically you can turn your investment property into your primary residence, and if you sell it, then you get taxed at that rate, the home rate you would get for a primary homeowner rather than this investor, the investment rate. So it's a lot lower. So that's one way to minimize it. The other way is if you die. So you could leave the property to son, daughter, whoever you want to. Whoever inherits the property will also inherit what's called a step up in basis. So I guess it's a good time to talk about what a basis is, because that's going to come up a couple times probably in this conversation. So might as well go ahead and get it out of the way. So basis is basically the original cost of the property plus any cost like lender fees or attorney fees. So if you purchase a property for $200,000 and then you had $5,000 in lender and attorney fees, your basis would be $205,000. So any gain you made on that property above the $205,000 would be subject to capital gains taxes. So when you own a property for some time, that basis does get adjusted by things like depreciation or improvements that you've made. But we're not going to go into all of that. Just know that if you do a 1031 exchange and then you think your basis is one thing and all of a sudden it's adjusted later on, that's why there's depreciation and improvements that you could make an adjustment in that basis. So back to the person who's getting your property. So say you bought it at $200,000 and then 30 years later you pass away and one of your children inherits this property and now it's worth $1 million. And so technically your child would be on the hook for that huge amount of capital gains taxes on that gain. But they get that step up in basis. So what that is instead of that 205,000 you started with, they get their new base. They get a new basis of the new market value of the property. So that's where they would start off. So their basis would be $1 million. If they decide to sell it right then, there would be no capital gains taxes. But if they held on to it for, let's say, 3 or 4 years and made another $200,000, they would pay capital gains on that $200,000 gain that they made over those years. So those are 2 ways that you can minimize your capital gains taxes using a 1031 exchange. Let's see what's next. Okay, so a couple things that you want to be aware of, because some people will get into a situation where, like, for instance, with COVID, if someone has lost their job, now they want to sell their property, and because they're in a bind, but they've done multiple 1031 exchanges. So maybe they've done this like 5 times before the property that they own now. You really want to talk to your CPA about whether that is a good move or not, because even if the property that you own now is has a negative gain, the gains from the previous 4 properties that you sold would have rolled over into this property that you own now. So you could still owe quite a bit of capital gains taxes. So you want to make sure that you talk to your CPA to find out what you're really going to owe if you decide to sell, because it might not make any sense. So that's one thing to be aware of. And then, okay, also, you shouldn't use a 1031 exchange to do flips, because a 1031 exchange is used as an investment property. It's to purchase an investment property, and meaning that that property should really be giving you some kind of income. So you should be holding it for a period of time for some sort of income. And with a flip, you're not holding it at all. You're buying it, you're fixing it up real quick, and then you're selling it. So you shouldn't really be using 1031 exchanges for flips. If you get audited, that could be fishy and probably not very good for you. So just throwing that out there. Also, if you're renting it to family and friends, you probably want to keep a paper trail and show that you are renting it out at market rate, because again, this property is supposed to be used as an investment, not as personal use, and that could be seen as personal use if you are just letting your family or friends live in your property. The other thing about a 1031 exchange is that if you sell property A and say it's worth $500,000, you then need to go buy another property that's worth equal or greater to this property. So it needs to be $500,000 or more, or you'll have to pay capital gains on the difference of the difference. So let me give you an example. If you sell this one for $500,000 and then you buy this one for $450,000, you're going to end up paying taxes on that $50,000 gain. So you can do that, but sometimes it doesn't really make sense because there's going to be like a point where the taxes are going to be so high it doesn't make sense to really do an exchange at that point. So you, again, talk to your CPA. You probably want to talk to your CPA before you do this anyway. But that's another thing you might want to ask them if you are purchasing a new property that didn't equal the cost of the old property. If the property is worth more, so this one's $500,000 and now you're buying a $700,000 property, you can pay cash for the other $200,000. You can get a loan, you can get owner financing on it. So that's all fine. Oh, okay. You also want to make sure if you're buying a new property that your lender knows that you're doing a 1031 exchange, because you wouldn't want to get to the end of the transaction and some people will try to buy an investment property with a second home loan because the interest rate is lower. But technically, an investment property and a second home are not the same. And, you know, some people will say, well, we're going to rent it out X amount of the time. Well, you want to make sure that your lender's definition of an investment property and your definition of an investment property are the same, so that you don't end up at the last minute with your lender getting a notification that you're doing a 1031 exchange and then they have to switch your loan from a second home loan to an investment loan, which could cause all sorts of delays. And there are timelines with 1031 exchanges that I'll tell you about in a minute, and that could cause a big problem with your timeline. So you just want to tell them from the beginning that that's what you're doing so you don't run into any speed bumps. Oh, okay. So next thing is the timeline. There is a timeline with a 1031 exchange. So it's 180 days total that you have to do this process, and there's two parts to it. So when you sell this property, you have 45 days from the day that this property closes to identify a new property. Then once you identify a property, you have 180 days to close on that property. That 180 days includes the 45 days that you spent identifying it. You don't have to spend the whole 45 days, of course, but so you have 180 days total to close on the property, and for only 45 to identify a property. These are really hard timelines. You cannot extend. There's no extensions on these dates. So once you miss it, you're just out of luck. So you have to be really careful. And in Hawaii, we have a lot of Hawaiian holidays like King Kamehameha Day, and that people aren't aware of if you don't live here. And I'm not even really aware of all of them. So you just want to make sure that you're talking with your accommodator and your realtor and whoever else is involved in the transaction to make sure that your scheduled closing date doesn't fall on one of those Hawaiian holidays, because if that happens and you're not able to close, you miss out on the whole thing. And what a small little, you know, that could have been fixed really easily. So just be aware of that. Okay, so I mentioned that you have 45 days to identify a property. And so how you identify a property is that your accommodator will give you a sheet and you need to fill that out with the properties that you are interested in purchasing. And there is a limit. So you can either identify 3 properties or you can identify 4 properties, but there's different rules for how many you can identify. I kind of feel like we're in a board game here. So anyway, I'll tell you the rules. So if you are identifying only 3 properties, then you can buy one or you can buy all three of those properties. They just should be equal or greater to the value of the property you just sold. And you don't have to buy them all, of course. You just have to buy one, or enough to, well, at least one, enough to be greater than the property you sold, or you end up paying some capital gains taxes. So that's the first way. Or the other way is that you could identify 4 properties, and if you do that, then those 4 properties, the total amount of the market value, wait, let me see how I say this. Okay, the total market value for all 4 properties cannot be more than 200% of the property you sold. So if you sold this property for $500,000 and now you have 4 properties, 4 properties that you've identified, those 4 properties cannot equal more than $1 million in market value combined. You don't have to buy all of those properties. It's just a way that you can identify more than 3 properties. They just can't be worth more than 200% of the property you just sold combined. So that's that. You really also want to make sure you fill out that form your accommodator gives you correctly, because if you screw up on that sheet, it could cause a delay, and then if you're like getting down to the wire, you could miss your timeline, so your deadline, I mean. Just checking to make sure if I missed anything real important. Oh yeah, I did. So also with 1031 exchanges, everyone always asks, what does a like-kind property mean? Because that is another rule. You have to purchase a like-kind property. Well, like-kind property is just any type of real property. So you can sell commercial property and buy a house, or you can sell land and buy commercial property, or you can sell commercial property and buy land. It just needs to be real property. You can't be going and buying a boat or a car or something like that. It has to be real estate. So yeah, like for like is kind of confusing, but yes, you can sort of have freedom. You don't have to buy a condo for a condo or land for land. So good news there. Let me see if I forgot anything else. Well, if I think that I pretty much covered all the basics, but if I did forget something, or if you have any questions that are pretty basic, comment below. And if you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, oh fine, you can give me a thumbs down, but that's kind of sad. And if you want more updates on real estate related topics, then click the subscribe button and I'll be so happy. So have an awesome day or evening or whatever time it is for you, and I will see you soon. Aloha.